Hey everyone, Kale here. Today we're going to be going over this new piece I've drawn. It's a cute little family of sheep farmers hanging out, cooking dinner, and conducting ritual magic. We're going to go through my process designing these characters, illustrating this final drawing, and other breathtakingly exciting elements of the artistic process. So I hope you're buckled into your nearest safety harness. To begin this drawing, I needed to create some characters to populate the scene. My own little family to conduct heinous arcane rituals. I was thinking of a grandmother character to actually perform the spell, and two little siblings to be in awe of their elder's prowess in the magical arts. I decided to begin with the girl and got to work on some thumbnails, playing around with different sizes and body types and whether to give her a small bonnet or giant pointy hat. I was most fond of this tiny Cindy Lou Who thing, so I expanded on that idea with some exploration sketches. I aimed to set these characters in a 17th century American yeoman farmer type setting. I was heavily inspired by the colonial era apparel by Samson Historical Clothing, so thank you very much for that. You get the coveted Kale Makes Art Gold Star Award for excellence. Anyway, my goal for this initial drawing of the girl was to nail down the visual style I would use for the rest of the project. I looked at a lot of cozy indie game type fare and aimed for something that was simple, clean, and cartoonish. Something along the lines that this artist used for the hit 2026 indie game Fairy Circle, which may have been me. For my initial shot at the render, I wanted to use clean, hard-edged shapes, but this gave the initial pass a clip art feel that I was not a fan of. The hard round brush was not sparking joy. I restarted the render and I used a different bristly brush for the hard-edged shapes and added some softer edges using this grainy brush to help describe the form a little bit more clearly without contradicting the simple aesthetic aspirations of the project. I painted the main lights with a cartoonish, cel-shaded style and left the softer gradients to areas of ambient occlusion or places where I thought I really couldn't get away with just a flat shape, like the back of the hair here. I really liked this spiraling circle shape in the hair. I thought it looked like sheep wool, so I decided to repeat it for the trim in her clothes. I was already looking for some way to visually tie each of the family members together, so I decided that this curly hair and wool trim would be the unifying visual element. I hadn't come up with a concrete backstory for these characters yet, so maybe they are a family of sheep farmers making clothes out of the livestock, sustaining themselves from the meat, and exercising their spirits for the sake of entertainment. Yeah, I guess that'll work. The mark of any good project is to improv random story beats instead of planning anything. So the daughter is done and we have our first character and sort of style guide laid out. Next, I got to work on her brother. I gave him a cool double-caped wool cloak, once again from the peerless Samson Historical Clothing outfitter. I laid down the flats and started painting in his eyes, but I suddenly realized that the red hair and green clothes I was painting on these characters looked incredibly Irish, like stereotypically offensively Irish. I repainted their clothes and hair to look a bit more non-specific and continued to render the gentle curls in his hair, with apologies to the great people of Ireland. I painted simple two-tone shading on his clothing along with a softer ambient occlusion layer where needed. He has a Quaker Oats style buckle hat, as I thought that is probably the best way to indicate the 17th century pilgrim time period I'm aiming for. I feel like hats are always the best indicator of time period for a character. I paint in the buckles on his shoes and the connector thing on his wool cloak. The cloak was also inspired by the half cape on the first outfit you pick up in Bloodborne. This project's first obligatory From Software reference. For Grandma, I initially was going to go with a nice, welcoming sort of character, like Granny from Looney Tunes. As I was drawing her, however, I realized that this was not the face of a woman who would explode the incorporeal spirit of a sheep ghost in order to see the pretty colors it makes. I started over and added a bit more Madame Mim to the character. The cackling, snaggle-tooth visage of the new grandma fit the vibe of the piece better. I gave her a mop of curly, spiraling hair to continue that shape language, along with a wool trim cape and a witch's cane thing. I was reading about witches in my local area, and there was one practitioner saying their worst fear was that you can buy witch starter kits from Amazon. So I attached a bunch of pouches and crystals and incense that are included in said witch's starter kit to the grandmother's cane. I thought this could convey that we're not dealing with a well-versed or caring practitioner of magic, someone who isn't ethically engaging with the field of study. But, spoiler alert, I didn't actually include these items in the final illustration because Grandma got placed too far away in the composition, so pretend I didn't paint them. So now we have all 3 characters done and ready to be featured in the big illustration. I put them to the side and can start figuring out a couple of assets and supporting materials that will help me in the final piece. I had a lot of different ideas for what Grandma's spell was going to look like. I've been on a little bit of a trip reading magic nerd nonsense and was really hoping to incorporate any of that somehow, as making YouTube videos about witches is absolutely the only way any knowledge I find in books like this is ever going to be put to any use. I wrote down a few ideas and cornered my friend in a Discord call and got his input on which of them seemed the least incoherent. The winner was the family using the skull of a lamb they were roasting to forcibly expel the spirit contained within, using the poor animal not just for sustenance, but deranged entertainment as well. This was inspired by the ancestral infant's head item in Elden Ring, the second obligatory From Software reference in this project. So I painted this magical explosion emanating from the sheep skull. I retained the swirling wool shape and painted a sort of abstract sheep face screaming as it's being summoned. Speaking of which, the skull that the spirit is emanating from rests on a little plate at the base. I throw in some gradient maps to give the whole thing a multicolor, vibrant display. Now I have a concept of the explosion that I can reference when I go to draw it in the illustration. Next is to build the little farm where these characters live in 3D. I drew an initial thumbnail where I'm going to have the grandmother in the middle casting the explosion, then the 2 children on the sides reacting to the events in the middle. Dotting the scene will be houses, trees, and fences and such. I built vague mannequins of my characters to pose in the scene. These rough models will help me get the placement and lighting down on the subjects. Honestly, these are a little embarrassing when I look back. I think if I'm going to use 3D models in every drawing, I probably should just learn how to actually 3D model. Like every artist has 2 paths, and it's like just sit through one 50-minute video where a guy teaches you everything you need to know about Blender, or continue to just stupidly staple tubes together. I placed some placeholders for the magical explosion, just a bunch of spheres stacked on top of each other with an emissive material so they glow and light the area around them. The boy is roasting some mutton on the left while the girl is baking bread on the right with a cute little bread oven. I also wanted to add a couple of sheep for consistency, and let's throw in a hapless father figure caught off guard by the magical events unfolding in front of him. That feels right. I watched this Proco video on lighting and placed a bunch of spotlights around the scene, crisscrossing and zagging so each character is illuminated and effectively lit in the scene. I was trying to improve my lighting game, but alas, I was not high enough level to effectively utilize this wisdom. This lighting scheme didn't work as effectively as I wanted it to and caused some problems down the road. I'm sorry I failed you, Ratatouille color key guy. For one final touch, I placed some bounce light for the girl and rendered out the image. Here is the 3D model with all our little characters scattered about the farm. Now all these supporting components are finished and I can make the actual drawing, and this illustration was really making me yearn for the eternal nap time, so we're just gonna get into it. For now, I placed the 3D model into the Photoshop document and started running through the rough sketch to get the loose idea of each subject. I'm confirming placement and gesture before moving on to the refined sketch, where I get into the details and forms of each of the characters like their clothes, faces, and magical spells, so I can paint on top of them in the next step. Next is setting up the flats for each part of the image. I chose a darker tone to kind of just gesture towards a local color for each character, the idea being that this would be a mid-tone that I'd paint light on top of with a dodge layer of some kind, then add ambient occlusion for the darker parts of the subjects like the various pits and crevices of the hat, for example. But I'm going to be honest here, most of my initial passes at this illustration are completely redone later, so moving through this painting linearly is just going to feel like a rug pull when I get 75% done and say, actually, forget all that, I'm changing it now. So I'm going to describe my intent with each of these decisions, then sort of perform an autopsy on what was effective or ineffective in this piece. As I did with the initial character renders, I laid out a light layer with a soft edge that I shaped based on the 3D model reference, then gave the edge some grit with the brush that I've been using for this whole project. This initial pass is very bright, but for now, I'm really just looking for the shape and I can edit the color and intensity later. I fill in some of the explosion and get a light layer on the grandma and the boy, and this is where things start to fray as I look back. I'm very quickly losing control of the intensity of the color and letting everything get saturated and extreme, like a new artist learning about the color dodge layer for the first time. I'm going to 100% too quickly and not leaving myself any room to build up the colors and values. I use some gradient maps to add color to the lamb spirit expulsion, but as I look back on it, it feels very flat, like it isn't sitting correctly in perspective. That will get redone multiple times later on. The cowering sheep and the cowering dad are placed in the back here. The sheep are a bit of a thorn in my side for the duration of this piece. I should have given them more attention, as they're important to tie in the shape language that I'm using to visually connect the family. The spiraling hair and trim on their clothes are supposed to evoke sheep's wool, and at this point in the process, I'm not continuing the sheep shape onto the actual sheep. I started working on the dad and realized the direction I'm going isn't going to create, shall we say, a convincing figure, so I repainted him and just kinda winged a new pose. He has a startled, ah, face that I appreciate in isolation for a second before getting serious and painting in his beard and hair. Many of the issues that I faced as I drew this piece could have been avoided with a little bit more deliberate planning. Obviously, sometimes you just have to draw something 2 or 3 times until you get it right, but I could have been more ready to draw the vital visual components of my scene here. I think one of the few things that remains intact throughout the piece is the little home in the background here. They have a cute house with a thatched roof and wood panel walls that are based off of this screenshot from the Vitch, where the main character is covered in strawberry jam. I just took the details in the background and copied them for my drawing. In the background, I rendered the trees. I started with a dark base, then slowly built up smaller and smaller shapes to give the trees a dense look without rendering every individual leaf. And it's a small thing, but I'm just happy that there's something in this drawing that I didn't have to redraw 17 times. We reach the end of phase 1 as I fumble around and add new elements like a rim light and atmospheric fog. I definitely was not satisfied with the illustration at this point and really needed some help to get it in stable condition. I reached out to my most trusted member of the Elder Art Council and had her critique my progress so far and help figure out how to get this thing back on track. Much of their feedback had to do with what was going on value and color-wise. Everything at this point is very bright and very saturated, meaning it was hard to determine where the focal point of the painting was. Everything in this piece was demanding a lot of attention, even tertiary background elements like the stars in the sky or the fire in the bottom left. And not demanding attention in a sick maximalist way, but in a I'm losing control of my life kind of way. I repainted the sheep spirit entirely. I tried to jury rig a fix at first, but I just needed to erase that thing and try again. I wanted it to sit in perspective more clearly and exist in the space more convincingly. After sketching in a new form, I painted it in again with the same continuous bright layers and gradient maps. I also made the actual head of the explosion a little bit more sheep-like as we were veering away from slight abstraction and headed into the realm of unreadability. I knew I needed to edit the value and saturation of these characters. I thought I could afford a small mercy and keep the layers and shapes the same and just edit the brightness and color. But I changed my mind on that because I knew I could make everything cleaner if I just repainted everything, even if that was kind of annoying. I think the second pass on both the main light and bounce light are more simple and appealing shapes, making the characters feel nicer to look at. And I hope it's something that anyone else notices besides me. The boy is re-rendered as well, still trying to get the lighting to be a bit more subtle and less attention-grabbing. I toned down the fire pit and just had some soft embers lighting the wood, removing the full campfire that was drawing attention away from the main subject of the scene. I added a new sheep to the midground because I was getting a little paranoid about the lack of sheep in this sheep-based illustration. I made some initial attempts to insert the spiraling shape language into the sheep's wool, basically just copying the grandmother's hair, but after a few failed experiments, I landed where it always lands, just redrawing the whole thing. Back in the sketch layer, I put in some new sheep and described the shape of the wool more deliberately, then painted the spirals in the wool like I did for the hair of the characters. This sheep's gormless face stares back at me in disgust, and these two shriek and wail at the realization they are staring at what will almost certainly be their own fate. Then there's some penultimate minor edits that I add into the scene. First, some grit and highlights into the lamb roasting on the now fading fire, and I redid the grass to have a bit more of a believable texture there in the midground. I went to show the illustration to my friends to see if I would get the appropriate social validation for my work here, but something about the painting gave me pause, however. Like, a part of me knew I was claiming an incomplete thing as finished. This is the most I have ever laid in bed and stared at a painting, trying to convince myself that it's fine, it's a good little painting, people will be amused by it, don't worry, it's fine. But I knew the truth. Deep in my soul, the truth spoke to me. And it said, "That sheep looks fucked up, man, and I think you gotta redraw it again." So I spent an evening reviewing my sheep notes and redrew the face with a more recognizable visage, removing most of the abstraction and just having a recognizable sheep head screaming at you. This new sheep face pleased me very much, especially as I look upon the before and after. This new sheep spirit guy really completes the whole piece. This is the most ham-fisted, improvised thing I've ever drawn, but now that I'm at the end, I find myself endeared to it in a weird way. Like, this is my dull, deformed son, and I will defend him until the end of time. Anyway, that's the drawing and that's the video. This project was difficult for a variety of reasons, but I hope there's some value in me rambling about the process here. Probably a lesson about preparation and seeing something fully through until the end, but I don't know. That's for you to figure out, dear viewer. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.